Do we even have enough room?
Yes. I had to pop it back in.
Sandy, Andrew. But then if Tom and Losa Hospital District, we have to try to recover it.
Yeah, I'm trying to,
You know, the district used to have their meetings at City Hall.
I think the plan is to.
Okay.
I can neither confirm nor deny. All I know is my commercial kitchen looks better every day, and I've got a great big room for meetings in it as well. Virtual.
Oh. We ready to go? 12:30. Okay, thank you, Esme. So I'd like to call this meeting to order, Finance Committee meeting, October the 4th, 2023. I would like to acknowledge that we are gathered today on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tla'amin Nation, as well as all Coast Salish First Nations on whose traditional territories we have the honor to live, including my home on Wai'ete, also known as Liskidi Island. We have an agenda before us. Is there any additions or changes, or would someone like to move adoption? Director Dowd? Adoption?
I've got a change I'd like to make, Chair.
Yes.
Something I probably could have done at the Regional Hospital District meeting, except we were using up all our time. And I'd like to make a report on answer to a question that we had of the MFA, the Municipal Finance Authority, about funding and long-term loans and their early repayment. And I'd like to give a report on that, maybe under 5.2 unfinished business.
Okay, 5.2 will add a report from Director Dowd on the MFA. Anything further on that? So if any, would anyone like to move adoption of the agenda as Director Gisborne, Director Elliott? Okay, so any discussion? Calling the question, all those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, so we will move on to the minutes of September the 6th, 2023. Are there any changes or omissions or errors in that? And seeing none, would anyone like to move adoption of those minutes? Director Elliott, Director Gisborne. Okay, discussion on that item. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, delegations and inquiries. We don't have any. Unfinished business, item 5.1, delegation of purchasing authority bylaw, procurement policy, and asset disposal policy. And this was referred from the September 6th Finance Committee meeting. And we have two separate motions. There's no and in between them. So we would first consider the recommendation number 1 or any alternative that the board puts forward. So what is the wish of the Assembly? Director Elliott?
I'll move the motions or the recommendations in the package.
Okay, so recommendation number 1, these 3 clauses in recommendation number 1. Is there a seconder for that? Okay, Director Lennox. Okay, discussion on this item. Okay, seeing none, I have a couple comments and maybe call on our manager of financial services for some comments. I'd like to first thank staff for providing details of the changes. This was on our last meeting, and our main concern was we didn't know what had changed. And from the extensive item here, it's much clearer what changed and why it changed, and all the changes are outlined, and it was quite extensive, so I think it was really, really good. I really like the notice of intent for direct awards. I think that's a really great addition. You know, I do have some concerns about the amounts, and so my question for that's in table. I'd have to look down there. That's in the you know, the increase in the amounts from the old bylaw to the new bylaw, and so I just like to call on our I guess our acting CAO, our manager of financial services, just to walk us through that and describe, you know, those items a little bit to us so we can make sure we're really clear.
Thank you, Chair. So, through the Chair, the former delegation of purchasing authority bylaw was just a bylaw. It didn't separate the bylaw from the policy, and so it was quite difficult for you know, there was a lot of shortcomings with it. And so this is meant to improve that. And one of the big problems that we were having was the quite low thresholds that that management would have to. They would have to submit an RFP, put an RFP out. It takes there was a lot of time involved in getting requests for proposals out, tenders for quite low dollar values. And so even though like these dollar values are increased, staff still are required to, do their best to get the best value for money, and to ensure that we are adhering to the strategic plan, and that we are looking at social procurement, procurement incentives. And so this basically, the increase in the purchasing authority means that staff still have to do their due diligence. They still have to go to request for proposal and tender for larger value contracts, but this will streamline the process so that the board isn't inundated with having to approve small purchases. And also it separates the the board's authority to, it's up to staff to really do purchasing, and it's up to the board to set policy and direction. So that gives a good separation. And that's the main reason for it. It's just because it will streamline while it still gives, it still ensures that we get good value for money. That's the main reason for such a dramatic increase in the authority that's delegated to staff. One other thing I did want to mention too was that if there is a particular procurement that the board sees as a large interest to the public, or something that you think is going to be controversial, you can specify, even though it's lower than the $500,000 limit, even though it's lower than that, that we want this to come, that we want this to go through, this kind of a process, or we want it to come to the board for approval before the award is given.
Thank you. And I have one follow-up, which I think that's great. And the policy, the bylaw and the policy are both a lot more clear to me from the old one. The old one had long lists of items, and this is nicely segmented into sections and so on. And I guess just my one follow-up on this numbers is, the one item that sort of stands out is this, $500,000 for up to $500,000 for the CAO. And I know, I'm trying to imagine what scenario that might be, and I assume that would be for an item that the board has already approved in the financial plan, because that's a big item, and yet this is providing authority for the CAO and one officer or manager to implement that direction from the board. Is that correct? And then if the board wanted to have further oversight of that item, then they could request per what you just said. Is that Ms. Greenan? Thank
you, through the chair. Yes. So, for example, if you had approved a project for $500,000, like as an example, could be a renovation to an existing building. If it was in the $200,000 range, right now, the CAO can only approve any costs up to $75,000. So that kind of a renovation would still have to go through the tendering process, and then it would, as long as it's within the financial plan, so you'd already would have approved the project in the financial plan, then the staff can go ahead and award that contract. Whereas right now, as soon as it hits the $75,000, so say if it's a contract for we've already approved a process or a budget, and an engineering proposal, for example, comes in and it's $130,000, then that has to now wait another month before it can be awarded, because it has to go to the board. So this way, it has to be in the financial plan. If it's not in the financial plan, staff can't move forward. It would have to go back to the board to either abandon the project if it isn't in the financial plan, or to ask the board for a budget amendment. So board still has the authority to approve projects in the financial plan, and as I say, to direct how they want a project to be tendered, what kind of process they want it to go through, if it's a particularly contentious project.
Yeah, that's great. And I would just understand that would that really, when we're in our financial planning process, these items, the big items, would be on our capital plan, and that we would be discussing it there. And if the board wanted to, make sure they had more oversight, they could do it then. And if the board approves it, then it's just saying, do the best job up to those amounts. Okay, I see Director, thank you. That answers my question. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So my question has to do with things that wouldn't come to the board that are small, that we would direct award, like catering throughout the year, yada, yada, yada. Do we do some sort of local procurement policy where we have a list of local providers that get pre-approved that you rotate stuff around on? So if you're a small business and you want to provide catering services to the regional district at some point in time, you can get on a list and get included. Is there anything that goes on for local procurement?
Ms. Greenan, you might be able to help with that.
Thank you, Chair. As far as I know, we don't have anything right now, but that is something that that would be considered when we look at social procurement, because part of social procurement is trying to support social enterprise and to support local businesses as much as we can. So doing something like that would be one way to support not just one local business, but we make sure that we support all of the local businesses, and rotating suppliers is a great way to do that.
And it also the benefit would also be allowing businesses who might have not been thought of to get on a list and have access, right? Because access is sometimes the barrier.
That's correct.
That's great. I think that's a good idea. And the provincial government has things like that for certain services that preferred or pre-approved lists of vendors and so on. Director McCormick, I saw your hand, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question kind of follows along from your comment. The only thing that really jumped out at me when I read this was that the $500,000 discretionary spending by the CAO. And I'm just wondering, I can see why 75,000 would definitely not be enough, in today's financial reality. But I'm just wondering why the $500,000 was chosen as opposed to, say, 300,000.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. When I looked at what other regional districts and other local governments were, what kind of thresholds they were using, and $500,000 just seemed to be, it seemed to be the right amount. Like if you're looking at, especially with the increased costs of goods and, well, mostly the increased costs of services, especially construction services. If we want to go forward with a project, we just thought that $500,000 made sense, and then, like I say, that would first have to be included in the financial plan, and staff would have to show that they've gone through the competitive process if it's required for, depending on who they're going to give the contract to. But if they would have to go through the competitive process, they can't just award that they can't direct award a $500,000 project, unless of course it's within the exemptions. But $500,000 just seemed like the right value when I looked at when I compared it with other policies in the region or in the local area.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any further comments? I see Director Gisborne's hand there.
Yep, that's mine.
That is yours. Okay, I was suddenly Director McCormick's head filled the screen, so I wasn't sure. Yes, go ahead.
So big thank you to staff for clarifying the difference between the old bylaw and the new bylaw. Absolutely love it. This is far more clear. There's two things under the purchase commitment and purchase authority, which is good. That's where we're at in our discussion. I see up to $5,000 for fire chiefs. No change in the limit from, I believe, the existing bylaw, which is 2011. And as inflation and everything's going up, I'm wondering if maybe we should increase that value to, 7,500 or something comparable, because I presume we're not going to be, adjusting these figures every year. So I'm wondering about the appetite amongst the committee for increasing that purchasing authority for the fire chiefs. And that's the one point. The second point, which I've heard some discussion on, is the up to $500,000 for the chief administrative officer and one officer or manager. And I hear that it has to conform with our financial plan and what's in the budget. But it also, it makes me think about some issues some other regional districts had where, I know it's not happening here, I think it was TNRD where they had a problem of a culture of spending and the board wasn't really being aware of it. And I'm wondering if maybe for that section for up to $500,000, that the chief administrative officer and one officer or manager and the chair also, being like just aware or kind of being like, yep, that is in line with our financial policy. And then if there is any kind of, confusion amongst board members going like, well, what was this $200,000 we're hearing about? The process for a board member is to go to the chair and say, hey, do you know what's going on about this? And the chair would then be able to clarify. So it's just kind of like having a bit more of that kind of flow through process where the board is still being kind of at a distance. We don't want to get down into the weeds. And I'm just wondering if that is something that's possible to add under the $500,000. So I guess two questions. First one, can we increase the limit for the fire chiefs? And the second one is for that up to 500,000. Could we put, the chair in there as part of just, so that way the board is kind of aware if I'm sure we are aware, but sometimes we get a call from a constituent that hears about some purchase, and that way, we directors then don't have to then start reaching out to staff about big purchases. We can just ask the chair and the chair can clarify that. So
I see Ms. Green, and I have a comment, but Ms. Green, you might be able to address those.
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair, I did have a discussion about the limit for the fire chiefs with the manager of emergency services, and based on the types of purchases that they make, he thought that is an adequate amount, the $5,000. And also, if the fire chiefs do recommend something higher, they can go to the manager of emergency services and ask, for approval as well. But I see that the manager of emergency services is on the line. If I could direct that question to him, Chair.
Yeah, maybe perhaps Mr. Toms, are you available to address that issue?
Yes, I am, Chair. Appreciate the question. It was a discussion, as the manager of financial services said. We really haven't run into any issues with the fire chief's spending limits, and in particular, since the board approved the fire chief's clerical assistant role, that's really been our goal, is to try to take a lot of that and also group some of the purchasing wherever possible, so that if we're buying hose with one department, we're trying to actually, when three others also need it, pool those together. So a lot of times it actually has been more appropriate for us in the last couple of years to not have individual fire chiefs doing a lot of that purchasing, but really to submit what they need. We're trying to get a better bang for our buck, if you will, in that regard. So again, to put it briefly, we really haven't run into that as an issue. We want to make sure that fire chiefs have spending authority, especially for things that might break in the hall overnight or over a weekend, and they really need to be able to purchase something. But otherwise, we're trying to give them that clerical assistance with their purchasing.
Oh, yeah, that answers my first question.
Thank you. And then the second one, and I'll make a comment, which is, I think this is because of these fairly dramatic changes, or fairly large changes, significant, I should say. What I would, I guess, request, and maybe ask Ms. Green if she might see if this is possible. It would be nice to have a report on this, I think, monitoring, because Director Gisborne suggested adding the chair. That may or may not be appropriate. We could entertain a motion to that or an amendment, but I'm fine with it as it is. But what would be useful, I think, would be to assess, at the end of the year, if there's a way to see how many projects fit into these categories, because really the $500,000 one is basically putting the onus on the board. Say, don't, if we're deciding on something that's that big, 480,000, make sure that we're doing our due diligence during the financial planning, not when we, once we approve that, expect it to be carried out. I'll also point out that there is this clause that says no contract splitting. So there is no way to take a $600,000 item and split it into two. So I think I was really glad to see that, because that makes this kind of clear. But I would, so Ms. Green, would it be, how difficult, and would it be possible to get, in a year, or maybe as part of our financial planning process, or any reporting, especially on the larger items, of how many projects fit into those categories? Because then we could just monitor it, and it's because, and let me just add one more comment, which is this is a little bit like results-based approach rather than procedure, process upfront, heavy administration, and we're making more decisions. This is streamlining it, and then if we had information after the fact, we'd be able to monitor a bit those items and see, okay, are they meeting our goals? Are we still comfortable with it? So I guess that's my question to Ms. Green, and if that's possible.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair, what I would recommend is that the board maybe put forward a motion as an addendum, saying that the board directs staff to provide an annual report on how any spending that exceeded the we could say a threshold of saying any spending that exceeded the $75,000 threshold, because that's the threshold that we have right now. And that would be a report that staff could put together annually for monitoring. I did want to address one more thing, if I could.
Sure. I was going to make a motion. Go ahead.
One other question that came up was, there was the discussion about the excessive spending at the TNRD, and yes, that was there was a culture of excessive spending, and as the finance department, we really try to watch our pennies and try to control how people are spending, and that approvals have been made, and that's all through the budgeting process too. This isn't intended to get people spending more. It's just intended to streamline how projects proceed. So, just because the threshold is increased doesn't mean that person probably won't change how they proceed with their projects. It just makes it quicker so that they don't have to, for example, if the manager of operational services had to get some engineering work done. We don't have in-house engineers. There is some provision now that could direct award up to a higher limit. So he can, if he has engineers that he's already worked with on a project, or that know our system, then he could engage those engineers.
Or pre-approved on a list.
Or pre-approved on a list. He could engage those engineers without going through another step of having to ask the board to engage them. And so it just will help our projects proceed quicker. And sometimes the projects need to be done in certain seasons, and they do get held up sometimes once you have to go through have to wait for the next meeting, etc. So the intention isn't, like I say, isn't to spend more. It's just to help us proceed with our robust work plans.
Thank you. I find that very reassuring, especially the recognition of what happened in another regional district, which I know isn't happening here, but I heard about it at a convention, and it was like alarm bells of like, hey, is there anything that we might be doing by accident that could lead us down that road? But hearing from our staff, they're on it. Awesome. Thank you.
Director, you're going to make a motion, but Director Elliott, you have a comment maybe before that?
Director Elliott? We do have a motion on the floor right now. So a new motion will have to wait until after we address the motion on the floor.
I'll sit on my hands.
I also wanted to make just a comment that efficiencies can help us spend less money, and if we're trying to create efficiencies in implementing a plan that we've already approved with a budget, and things are within budget, it doesn't necessarily help you spend less money to have more administrative burden. So I just wanted to make that point, but it can help us make good decision to think upfront about all the kinds of services that we might need throughout the year on a ad hoc basis to do direct awards with, and put some planning into how do we be fair with distributing that through a social procurement lens. And a lot of that is getting pre-approvals list, making sure people have access, assessing things, people or groups ahead of time to know who you can reliably use that already help you on your social procurement goals, rather than leaving them each and every time to be assessed at the time that you're using them. So that's also an efficient way to go. And so the more things we can do to streamline process, the less money we spend on implementing them. So I was being in support of your policy, your process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Director Elliott. And so I think, rather than adding this as this other item as an amendment, we'll entertain it in a moment. So on the main motion in front of us, is there any further discussion that anyone want? Director Doubt, is your hand, or you're just scratching your
Just waving hands down.
Just waiting. Okay, so I will call the question on the motion in front of us. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, so Director Gisborne, do you want to?
I would like to move the motion that was described by our Chief Financial Officer.
Okay, Ms. Sturton, do you need Ms. Greenan to say it again?
Thank you, through the chair. Yes, if you wouldn't mind, Ms. Greenan, I have so far that the committee recommends to the board that the board direct staff to prepare an annual report, and that's as far as I got.
An annual report on any spending above $75,000 incurred throughout the year.
Yep,
I'd second that.
Great. Okay, thank you, Director Doubt. Seconded. Is there any discussion on this motion, which is to ask for additional reporting? Director McCormick.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair, and I support the recommendation. I'm just wondering, an annual report once a year, time would have lapsed certainly from some spending to the time that we would get the report. So I'm just wondering, could staff do it on a semi-annual basis? Would that be a hardship? So that's my question, if we made it semi-annual instead of annual.
Ms. Greenan?
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Actually, we bring a quarterly financial statement status of where you're at with your financial statements. We could just add it to that. So quarterly, change it to quarterly in conjunction with the year-to-date financial statements.
I'll move that amendment that it be changed to quarterly.
Okay, we'll do a quick second. Oh, Director McCormick, carry on.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I was going to move what Ms. Greenan said, but in this case, I'll be happy to second it.
Okay, so we have it won't show up in the minutes either way. So we have an amendment to change annual to quarterly. Director Doubt.
Thank you. I was just scratching my chin before, but this time I was trying to get your attention.
Yeah, no, I've been watching. Thank you for the wait.
I just want to remind everybody what we're trying to do here is the motion is intended to provide efficiencies and a smooth operation of spending that allows managers in our departments to spend money without coming to the board. And I'd support an annual report about what that spending is, so we can do what the chair of the committee said would be a good idea, that the board could look at the end of the year and see how it's working. If we're going to do it quarterly and we're going to examine it quarterly and we're going to ask questions, we might as well get rid of the purchasing bylaw, because we're not going to get the time efficiencies that Councillor Elliott was talking about. I think going back and looking at that as a careful second thought and careful observation over a period of time to see how much those guidelines are being used will be really valuable. But doing it more often than that is kind of defeating the purpose of what we're trying to do here.
Thank you, Director Dow. Director Elliott, and then Director McCormick.
Thank you, Chair. So the value of the oversight and having to do the report is that the board will see the spending and staff will know that. and be prepared to defend themselves. Quarterly doesn't change it, it doesn't make it any different than annually. It just does it more often. So I liked the original motion better. And the reason is we're going to only spend one time a year doing our oversight on spending that already happened. I think that doing it more often just creates, it creates more work for everybody and doesn't increase the oversight that we have, because we're still going to know about everything over $75,000 and be able to ask questions. And all of the people spending over $75,000, which there's only 2 of them, will be prepared to defend those decisions that they made. It's after the fact. They're implementing a plan that we already approved on budgets that we already approved. So I don't see the value of doing it more often. Thanks.
Thank you. Director McCormick and then Director Gisborne.
Thank you. And you'll recall, Chair, my first question in raising this was, is it a hardship? So I guess I would question whether or not this is going to put an undue hardship and create a lot of work for staff, or if it's something that can merely be just kind of, produced through normal procedures quarterly instead of annually. Is it a lot of work or not?
Ms. Greenan, how much work is this?
Thank you, Chair, through the Chair. It would be a little bit of work because it's not, because our system right now, we don't have an electronic purchase order system. It's all manual. So it would take a bit of work to put it all together quarterly. So
thank you.
Okay, in that case, I can live with the annual. That's fine. I can withdraw my amendment.
Okay, and Director Gisborne, is it okay? Director Gisborne, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. I have been convinced. I agree with what Director Dowd is saying and Director Elliott, and hearing from our CFO that doing it quarterly will cause additional work. And I think it comes back to, why are we asking for this information? And the reason why I would like to see the information about expenses over $75,000 is so that the board and the committee can reassess our purchasing policy if we think that there's any issues. If we're doing it every quarterly, well, we're not going to be, looking at it under the same lens of what our current purchasing policy is. So I'm very happy to, vote down the amendment, go back to the original motion, which is annually, and then once a year when we get those figures. And then if there's concerns raised by the board and committee members about, maybe we need to change some of the figures or change some of the oversight because there might be some concern, then that I think would be the time to do it. Just once a year, we get the figures. If there's concerns, then that's when we deal with it. If we're dealing with it quarterly, it just adds more more workload onto our staff. And then for us as a committee, when we're getting these things quarterly, it starts to becoming like that revenue anticipation borrowing bylaw. We just get it, we pass it, and we move on without actually taking the look into why we're doing it. Because this, even if it's done annually, it's going to still take some work on staff. And, I think we do it, a couple of years, see how it works. And if everything's fine, we say, yeah, we don't need this recorded anymore. But if we do, the board, think that there's some issues that where we adjust the policy, that I think is our intention. Our intention, I don't think, is to start going, well, why did this staff purchase this or they or that? It should actually be for us to be setting the policy. And if we have an issue with the policy, then that's the purpose of the motion. So I'm very much in favor of voting down the amendment, which is on the floor. And then the main motion,
Okay, so let's try to be efficient here and dispense with this amendment, because it doesn't sound like there's a lot of support. So it'll be easiest just to put the motion forward. So I'm going to call the question on the amendment to change annual to quarterly. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimously opposed. So that fails. Now we're back to the main motion, which is to ask for a report. Is there any further discussion on that item? We've discussed it quite a lot. Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, great. So Thank you, everyone. That was a very good suggestion by Ms. Green, and I think it's a good way. So now we've got still one more motion here, recommendation to consider, which is the asset disposal policy. What would the board? Okay, Director Gisborne, Director Lennox, is there any discussion on the asset disposal policy? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay, great. So we're moving on to the next item, which is correspondence. We have one item of correspondence with some business arising.
5.2, Chair.
Oh, 5.2. Sorry, my apologies, Director Dow.
You tried.
It wasn't printed on the agenda because it's not
there.
I'm just plowing through the printed agenda. So thank you, Director Dow. The floor is yours.
So, part of the confusion is that this actually arrives out of a report on the UBCM and a question that came from the Regional Hospital District Board meeting earlier before the UBCM. So as the chair of the committee and our delegate to the Municipal Insurance Agency and the Municipal Finance Agency was otherwise occupied at UBCM, and their meetings both happened at UBCM. I attended as the alternate for that. I was just going to hit briefly on the Municipal Insurance Agencies. That was attended by delegates for all of the municipalities and the regional district in the province, and we approved all the different changes to the insurance purchasing for different organizations. It provides an excellent group purchasing of insurance for regional districts and municipalities that makes it much more efficient, inexpensive, and provides insurance that meets the municipalities' needs very well. There were changes to the rules for that insurance this year. Mostly they were designed to allow the Islands Trust to be able to come in and be part of the Municipal Insurance Agency list of customers so they could purchase insurance as well. It made for a long list of amendments. I think there were about 11 long amendments that had to be made. And an interesting note was that it took a few minutes to wait in the hall for actually a quorum to arrive. But it was touch and go whether to be able to have that meeting until somebody showed up a few minutes late, and we were able to get on with business and get it done. But it was an encouraging report, because that the Municipal Insurance Agency is an example of collaboration, organizations working together for the benefit of the citizens to provide really good coverage and protection for assets. That's that. Then came the Municipal Finance Authority meeting. And I want to talk about that because we had talked at the Regional Hospital District meeting about a plan to pay down some loans, some long-term loans for the hospital district from the MFA. And the CFO had reported at the meeting that they had tried to pay down that loan, that long-term loan, and the MFA had said, sorry, the rules have changed. I committed to get an answer at the meeting at UBCM, and I'll tell you what happened is well before that, actually the day after our hospital board meeting, Peter Rubank from the MFA had contacted the regional district and contacted me and asked to have a meeting at the UBCM, and we met at the UBCM. And the explanation was that in 2019, the rules on early payment of long-term loans had changed. And the reason for that was the process of repaying long-term loans provides the regional district paying interest and principal and some money to reserves in a regular monthly payment. All of those reserves are congregated together and reinvested and provide protection and provide a lower possible interest rate on borrowing money. So the pool of money that goes in there with every payment and goes to the end of the loan is actually owned by every municipality that has a loan. And if one municipality was allowed to pay off early, it would affect the rights of the other people in there. So that rule was changed in 2019. The MFA realizes that they maybe can improve their communications, and they will do that, but that was the explanation of when that changed and why. And And one of the encouraging things that came later in that meeting was the interest rate was lower than we had expected it might be at this port. It was slightly over 4%, not as high as we thought it might be. And the solution that they offered at the MFA was that they have an investment facility where the city or the regional district could invest the reserves they put in there and earn 5% while we're paying 4.5%. So it could end up as a better deal actually than early repayment of the loan. So it had a solution. I was really impressed that the MFA contacted us when they heard about the question, and credit to Mr. Galinsky and the Powell River Beach. The MFA reads the newspaper. And, they heard about it, and they contacted the regional district, and they contacted myself and to solve the problem and answer the questions. And I thought I was pretty impressed by that. And all in all, at the meeting, I think as far as the finance authority goes, we're well represented and have a great, again, collaborative process going with other municipalities, and it saves everybody money on their borrowing. So hope that clarifies things and answers the question I wanted to make sure we got covered.
Thank you, Director Dow. That's excellent information, and I really appreciate it. That's really, these are the kind of the foundation to a lot of what we try to do, and to understand it and understand the rationale behind these changes is really pretty good. Director Elliott.
Thank you for that report, Director Dowd. I have a question as it relates to it came up in the first place, and Mr. Galinsky reported on it because we had put reserves away intending to pay down part of our debt, and the answer you're telling us is we can now use that reserve in a way that would offset their new rule. And I wondered if we could find out from Ms. Greenan if that's an option, or how that would work, how we would do that.
Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. Yes, we can, at the December Regional Hospital District meeting, I'll put forward some options to use that fund. So basically what it worked out to be was that the new payment, because it was less than we anticipated, the new interest rate, it was 4.52% is what they've secured. So the payment will be $343,000 and some change more than what we're paying now. But if we earn 5% interest on the 4%, then that's $200,000 that we could be earning per year. So we could offset some of that. And so, those are some options. But the other thing to consider too is that Vancouver Coastal Health is also coming forward quite regularly now with requests for funding. And we are going to have we are setting up a strategic planning session for the hospital district. But, if we do need to fill those requests, they would have to come from borrowing, and we wouldn't know what the interest rate was. So that's another option too, is we could potentially use some of those funds to offset future interest by accessing the reserves rather than making more borrowing for the hospital district. Right now, when they come forward with requests, we've been borrowing for the most part to fund those requests.
Thank you.
Director Gisborne.
Thank you. I really want to understand this, and please forgive me. So when we have like a major project that we're spending money on, and we typically, I think we can take money out for a 30-year period, but it's in 10-year increments, and after 10 years we gotta reborrow through the MFA. So my understanding is the rules are now that we take out a 30-year loan, and then after 10 years, when we essentially renegotiate the debt, we still have to, like, we can't just use the money in our back pocket to say, well, like, here's half of it, we don't want to spend as much. Is that understanding correct now? It's like,
yes.
So Ms. Greenan, I'd just like to remind the board, we don't have a motion here, so we have a report. So I want to, if we want, but I think we can answer this question. Ms. Greenan, maybe Director Dout.
You just said yes.
Oh, I just said yes. Okay.
Here's the answer.
The answer, and
we have the answer.
I find that kind of disturbing because I think it sets kind of the wrong message in the community. Because, like, as I always understood growing up, if you got debt, you got a mortgage, or you're paying off a car, you're very much encouraged to try and pay it off as quickly as possible, because otherwise, if something else comes up, having less debt means that, well, we can take out more money to build something else. So I just think it kind of sends the wrong message in the community. But if them's the rules, there's not much we by ourselves can do to change it. So,
Director Doat?
Yeah, I'll try to keep it short. What the Municipal Finance Authority is always doing is trying to combine all the different borrowing from municipalities into one big ball of money that they can borrow on the international market as cheaply as possible. And the rules around early repayment are part of making that repayment as seamless and as reliable as possible. And that requires some sacrifice. The early repayment option is a sacrifice in there, but it's recovered by the lower interest rate that everybody pays over a period of time. And those differences between what I can get as a mortgage if I go down to the bank and try to get a mortgage today, and what the municipalities can borrow from the MFA, it's very different and very worthwhile for the municipalities. So maybe a complicated answer, but that's the best I can do. I think we should be proud that the MFA is there. They do a really good job, and they're super responsive to our concerns.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the way I see it is it's it's the balancing between helping an individual borrower that's a local government compared to helping and ensuring the protection of all the members, which is all local governments. And that's what I understand the trade-off is. And we get this lower interest rate because of the decisions made by MFA, and they're very good at it. We have the low interest, and then we may, and once in a while be able to make more interest investing than what we pay, just because that won't always be the case. It's probably more the exception. But okay, so there may be more on that later on, I guess, as we go forward with our planning. But we'll get back to our agenda here, move on with our agenda, I should say. Thank you for that report. I think that was really good. We have correspondence, item 6.1, which we will move to 7.1. Is there anything else besides the 7.1 that anyone wants to raise? Seeing none, we'll just move on to 7.1, which is correspondence from Selena Speed, Comox Valley Regional District Corporate Services regarding NI 911 Director's resolutions.
So moved.
Director Gisborne, Director Lennox, is there any discussion on that? Director Doat?
Yeah, I'd like to explain what all this complicated language is about. And it's a several-step process. And I think the most important part of this step is to make sure that the voting rights in North Island 911 match the money people put in. So we want to have the votes kind of match pretty close as can possibly be to what each regional district is paying to be a member of North Island 911. Right now there are, I think, 24 shares, which makes dividing those shares up extremely difficult. With a lot of advice from corporate lawyers and finances, the decision was made to create 100 shares in North Island 911 and redistribute that. So where you see the dividends being awarded, there's changes in the slight number of shares to match the actual contributions that each regional district makes to the 100% values of the corporation. Ours doesn't change very much. If you look through it, then it doesn't change very much, but some of the ones, particularly larger municipalities with more growth in their assessments, change more, and other regional districts are changed more or less. The whole payments into North Island 911 have changed over the last couple of years, over I think the last term and a half, to where they are now based on the assessed value of properties within the regional district and the population, those two things. So it was a matter of some controversy. It's been sorted out. Basically, the board of directors agrees on that distribution of costs right now. And these share appropriations are designed to reflect that. The other thing that we want to do is to make sure I'm doing this without my notes.
It's okay.
My memory is to make sure that somehow we take care of the other variable in there, which is the call rates, because the calls aren't the same per capita or per dollar of assessment value per regional district. Our call volume is slightly higher than our share volume of the region of North Island 911. So we're getting a little bit of a deal, but you know, it's only maybe a 0.5% difference. It's not huge, and we haven't made any decision to do that. So this is the basic idea is to change the share ownership of it so it reflects the costs that are being paid by each one of the regional districts in a fair manner. So hopefully that will explain what it is. I need to sign this so we can put them into play.
Thank you for that, Director Dowd. I think that helps all of us. It helped me understand, because I had that sense of that, but it was very, yeah, I see, you know, I think it helps us really get the gist of what's going on, because reading through bylaws, resolutions, I should say, that have shares of, you know, carved up is a little bit harder to understand the intent. Director Lennox has a
Thanks, Chair. And just again, because your explanation helped me out a lot, because I didn't know what I was looking at. I thought I was getting some shares, but so the first part is transfers of shares to reflect that equity that you're talking about. Second part is you had to cancel some.
You had to cancel all the shares and create.
Oh, I see. And create shares. Okay. And then the final section 3 is, it was interesting to see regional district Nanaimo at a 0.5 compared to some of these other areas. That's just basically how much they're contributing to the service.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And just for Director Lennox, so the second, and it looked like it was over 2 days. So you know, there was September 16 and September 15. So there's, there's different tables of numbers, and they somehow all add up to get at what Director Dowd's talking about. So, because a couple of pages later, there's our RDN has 18.81. The 0.5, and cancellations and distributions, and it's a little bit
corporate governance. Things have to happen on different days, and it's a step process. But the idea is to make sure if you're paying money, you get fair representation and fair vote. The other thing that I was trying to remind myself of was that there's also a change in the bylaw about when the North Island 911 will request funding from regional districts, because currently they're requesting their funding from regional districts in the middle of the year, which requires various financial arrangements to make sure that the expenses can be paid for the first half of the year before getting any income. I just want to make sure everybody knows that's in there.
That's great. Oh, Director McCormick.
Yeah, quick question. Are the number of shares based on population? Is that the basis for allocating who gets how many shares?
The current share, the share distribution at the end is to recognize a formula of assessments within the regional district and population. Okay. So some have, people, each regional district has its own ratio between the assessed value of the assets and the population. And those are different. And both of those actually have an effect on North Island 911 services. If you've got more people, you are more likely to call 911.
Thank you.
Is there any further discussion on this? Okay, seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Thank you for that. Okay, on to reports. 8.1, the Resource Recovery Center Waste Transfer Station Temporary Borrowing Bylaw.
The recommendation.
Moved by Director Dowd, seconded by Director Lennox. Is there any discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Okay. Sorry, did I miss someone?
Nope.
Oh, we were just laughing at how you called Director Brand Directored out, but
Oh, did I? Oh, God. Excuse me, Director. I can retroactively.
Can't even see him,
edit the
can you?
document. Yeah, there was a hand up. I should have called it Director Lennox because it came up on his head.
Yeah, the Director Brander is back there somewhere.
I'm back here.
Sorry.
Thank you. Sorry about
All
that,
right.
Director Brander. Okay, item 8.2, extension of Republic Services Transport and Disposal Contract for Municipal Solid Waste. And that's to extend the contract for 1 year, Director
The recommendation.
Brander
Good.
and Director Lennox. Okay, is there any discussion on this item, 8.2? Seeing none, I will call a question. All those in favor? Opposed, none opposed, carried. Okay, so the next one, item 8.3, Community Emergency Preparedness Fund, Volunteer and Composite Fire Department's Equipment and Training Grant Opportunity. So it's for an application. Director Lennox moved. Director McCormick seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Director McCormick?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's a question on page 4 of the report. And it's about the training could be opened up to non-QRD fire departments in the region. And I'm just wondering, would that be on a space availability basis, or how would you make that determination?
Mr. Toms?
Through the chair, it's a great question. There's been a lot of work done to date over the last few years regarding mental health, critical incident stress management. We've tried to do that on a regional basis. Each project is a little different. If you'd like a more comprehensive answer, I would defer to Melanie, our health and safety coordinator. She's really the much more hands-on in how we deliver these kinds of services for the fire services.
Ms. Taylor, maybe you can help with us here a bit.
Sure, thank you. Yes, through the chair, the short answer I would say is yes, it would be on a space. We would offer the spots to the QRD members first. That said, there's inevitably more seats than there are, QRD members available. So we like to open that up, and I think it really strengthens the programs in general when we've got that regional capacity. So I think it's a win for everybody. But yes, the short answer is yes, those spots would go in-house first.
Yeah, thank you. And certainly less necessarily reliance on other departments coming to the aid through the mutual aid agreement would probably be good. So making each department as self-sufficient and resilient as possible is really appreciated. So yeah, space availability, great. Thank you. And you'll let the departments know if there is space so they know to put forward members. Is that correct?
Ms. Taylor?
Through the chair, yes, correct.
Thank you.
Thanks. Director Elliott.
Thank you, Chair. So I think this is all very positive, and I like that we're spending time on the mental health. I wondered, have we done this program before? Is this the first time, or is it a continuation or a resubmission for another year? And have we had good uptake, and have we seen some good positive results if we have been doing it before, or is it new?
Either Mr. Toms or Ms. Taylor. I'm not sure. Miss Taylor. Maybe I'll focus here.
Thank you. Through the chair. No, this specifically, no, we haven't done this one before. This is, I like to call this another tool in our toolbox of mental health. The Resilient Minds training specifically is something that's been done. We've had a few people take it here and there from our fire departments, but not what we're looking at doing with one of the things we're looking at doing with the grant money would be to do a train the trainer. So what's awesome about that is we can take this one-time injection of grant money, use it to train our own people to become trainers, to then deliver this course on an ongoing basis to the departments for years moving forward. So that would be new. And then in terms of the second component, staff's still looking at some different options, but in general, we're looking at sort of a suite of mental health and resiliency workshops and different types of training, mental and physical, that would sort of provide like a bolster of mental health and wellness to our departments. And so no, that would be something that's brand new. And yeah, like I said, just one more tool we'll have in our tool belt.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And I'd just like to say I'm really appreciative to see that this, we're applying this year from this funding stream for mental health. I think, there are other things we could be applying for under this funding, but I think mental health is, for the department members, is a really huge issue. I mean, it relates to not just an ethical thing to do, but, recruitment and retention. That our members see things that are really difficult to see, and they do things that are really difficult to do and live with those. And so I think really this is sending a strong signal that we're putting our efforts to take care of our department members. Mental health is more important than, valves and things, the things that we could be getting. So I think this is really good and it's timely, it's important and needed. Is there any further discussion on this item? Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Unanimous. So that's carried. That's great. So item 8.4, Lund sewer parcel tax and user fee bylaw amendment, and the motion has a blank option. So the recommendation is to, I'll leave it to Director Lennox. What would you like to move?
Yeah, thanks, and I appreciate the report and the options, and I'm going to move to insert option number 2 into this recommendation.
Okay, so option number 2, and that's a motion. Is there second to Director McCormick? And is there any discussion on this item, Director Lennox?
Yeah, I mean, as you can see from our agenda, we're going to be looking at this type of situation again, and probably again and again. And I can, I'm new to this, and it's having these increased kind of asset management pressures coming at us with increasing frequency. And so it is concerning. You can tell we have a professional asset manager at work here, which is comforting because we have the information in front of us, and it's a little disappointing that, with no increases over the last 5 years, not just for this service, we find ourselves where we are. Looking at the 3 options, I know we can't do anything, nothing. That's not an option. But with, as you're well aware of the pressures that are happening in Lund with our upcoming water improvements and other issues, I think that option 2 is going to be a big hit for people. And as you can see, some of our businesses are going to take some pretty even bigger hits than the residences for some of this cost. So I think it strikes a balance. Our residents are going to be faced with quite a few increased costs here over the next little while. And although I'd hate to, I'd like to say, option number 3, I think option 2 is strikes a balance, and it doesn't have that 25% hit in the first year. So thank you.
Thank you. Director Elliott and then Director McCormick.
So I just have a question. So I think option 2 does a good balance of spreading out this really big spike in inflation that we've had that's caused cost drivers to go up so fast. My question is, if we continue to see large increases in inflation, and are we going to be seeing an even harder hit down the road by not keeping up? And when would we assess whether the cost increases are leveling out and hopefully not continuing at the high rate of inflation we've been seeing? And so I just wondered if we had any thoughts around that at all.
That could be a good question. Oh, Ms. Greenan.
Thank you, Chair. Through the Chair. Yes, we are in the process where that was one of the goals of having, increasing our staff and having the Assistant Manager of Financial Services in place. The one of the goals for that position was to work to develop long-term financial plans. I think that's really what we need here, is a long-term financial plan, because that will give us a better indication of how we're going to actually meet, how we're actually going to fund all of the replacements as they are needed in the future. Right now, we just have, the number. We kind of have a number of what we should be putting away each year, but that number is so large that, you know, to get to that would be really difficult for people. So we are still relying on, if we do have to do replacements, that we are going to have to borrow a portion of the funds. So there's always that balance about, you know, how much the taxpayers today put into the fund, and then how much the taxpayers of the future contribute to those upgrades. So we're trying to strike that balance. And as I said, as we work towards more long-term financial plans, you'll be able to really see that when they're in place. But right now, we're just doing our best.
Thank you. I am always worried about what we're burdening our future children with. And as you know, and I have property in Lund too. Even if we sell our business, we're still gonna have property in Lund, and I don't want my grandchildren paying for stuff I should have paid for today.
So it was Director McCormick before Director Dowd, I believe. So Director McCormick and then Director Dowd.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. I think option 2 is really good compromise. So I applaud Director Lennox for putting that forward. We have to not lose sight while we're planning asset management and the full replacement cost and the need to raise money for that. We can't lose sight of the taxpayers' ability to pay either. And so this does create a chance to put some money away. With every time you know, a major project comes forward, there are opportunities for grant funding. So I'm not quite as worried about having all the money put aside at the end of the day for an asset replacement. But being well on the way is certainly you know, better than not being on the way. So keeping the taxpayer in mind, I think, is really important, because this issue will come up again. It's coming up again today, and probably will come up again and again. So I think that's important for us to keep in our consideration. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Director Dowd.
I think
Director Brander.
You know, when I look at the report, there's pretty straightforward and simple options. Like option number 1 is the straightforward business solution to pay the cost of the services, and it, you know, and the con is that that's a substantial increase in taxpayers' costs. Taxpayers are going to have to put in the most substantial money in order to get option 1, which is an allowance to operate the system, to build the reserves, and to eliminate the risk of large increases in the future, larger than this one. That's the safest and most conservative way to do it, as long as everybody thinks we can have the ability to pay. Option 2 is a compromise. It has a risk. You'd end up paying more down the road because of choosing option 2 right now. And option 3, in my view, is an even higher risk of more impact on the taxpayers later. So, you know, option 2 makes sense to me. It doesn't do everything we would like to see in a perfect world. It doesn't create the kind of reserves that would even out the impact on taxpayers. But it makes sense to me to try to do that, because it's going to be tough times for the taxpayers. And, you know, unless you go with something like number 1 and look at the expected costs of the sewer system over the next 80 years and growth over the next 80 years, you're going to have to be doing these decisions every year or so and find out by experience what the inflation is at the time. But I think option 2 is reasonable.
Thank you. Director Brander.
Thanks, Chair. As a general rule, I'm not a big fan of putting a financial burden on future generations. But I also appreciate the concerns about the current taxpayers being able to handle the burden right now. So while in many ways, I think option 1 is probably the better option, I'm willing to accept option 2 as the way we go. But I would like, just for, I guess, clarification, if we could turn to Ms. Green about the first con that is listed. It says this would increase the risk of cost overruns in the service. So just for everybody's information, how exactly would those be dealt with?
Okay.
Ms. Green.
Thank you, through the chair. So right now, what happens is we have a $20,000 reserve, operating reserve in the service, and that's for repairs and maintenance of the service. And then other than that, the other potential pot of funding is statutory reserve, but statutory reserves can only be used for capital. So, you know, most major injections into the sewer system are capital in nature. They're generally an upgrade. There's something that will extend the life. But if there was something that was simply a repair, but it was very costly, that's where we need to draw on that $20,000. And it's so that would be like an unanticipated repair. Generally, the manager of operational services and the manager of asset management, they usually try to anticipate what kind of repairs are needed and look at those in advance. It would be, but that's where the risk comes in, is if we did have a major repair, you can't borrow for operations, and you can't use the statutory reserves for capital.
So then what would happen, I guess?
We would have to try to find, if we had to do the repair, it would probably, what would have to happen is if we couldn't find ways to reduce our spending in other areas of the operating budget, we would probably be forced to go into a deficit that year. You can't budget for a deficit, but if you happen to go into a deficit, the way to recover from that would be the next year we would have to tax the taxpayers for that.
Okay.
So instead of being proactive, we would have to be reactive.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. Is there any further discussion? The only thing I would add to the discussion, which has been very good, is I really appreciated the work staff put into this report. So these are tough questions, and I really appreciated seeing these options and having the kind of range of pros and cons and how that shifts from one, you know, risk factor to another risk factor. And I think it was really helpful for us. Okay, so I will, seeing no further discussion, I will call the question on this. All those in favor? Opposed? Unanimous. Thank you. So on to the next item, which is similar, 8.5, Myrtle Pond water parcel types and user fee bylaw amendment. Director Gisborne, what would you like to do?
I actually have written down here that I would like to move option 2, and that's, you know, it's a coincidence. We didn't plan this.
No.
And is there a seconder for that?
Seconded.
Okay, Director Lennox, discussion on this. Director Gisborne?
Yeah. Area B in the discussion of water is always a very deep topic. Sorry, I'm a dad. I had to do a pun. But it's really eye-opening in our staff report, where we're currently putting $37,000 into the statutory reserve. And in order to cover fully the infrastructure replacement costs, we should be putting $140,000 into our statutory reserve every year. We're only talking about 84 properties. That's a big chunk of money. And it's a balancing act that we have to, you know, using the UBCM motto, the balancing act, that we have to try and figure out here. Because if we don't adequately fund the system, and then in the future we have to take out long-term borrowing, which what we're hearing from the Municipal Finance Authority is essentially, you know, a commitment for 30 years. That's putting the financial burden onto the next generation and even the next generation. And you know, things are getting tougher every year for each generation. So I'm looking at the figures. I find option 2 to be a bit more reasonable. With a 10% increase in the parcel tax, that should be an increase of $4,846. And option 2 also has a 10% increase in user fees, which should be an increase of $7,870. So that means that we actually get more money in from user fees than we do from the parcel tax. And I've talked about this in the past, and I've spoken to a few individuals about it, that our user fee model might also need a little massaging at a future meeting, because there's like the lowest limit, which is the lowest amount, is actually quite a large amount of water. That is essentially your minimum charge, and you get charged for it whether you use it or not. So myself, right now, the proposal is a 10% increase essentially across the board. But I would actually be more in favor of a larger increase in the user fees portion, you know, maybe towards something like 15%. But then the committee also at a future date work on massaging that user fee bylaw to, you know, kind of make it a little bit more tiered so that people that use less water, they get kind of a bit of a break. And then as people get higher and higher up into their usage, they have to pay more, kind of like on an exponential rate, which is very similar to what's in the bylaw right now. But this is something that's being discussed all over the province. Our water systems are expensive. They are very expensive to operate. And if we can allow, you know, increased population density within our water systems, because water lines are priced per meter, then you can end up with more people essentially paying into the system. And when we were at our open house for the cost inclusion bylaw, where I think the number $30,000 was floated for if you want to join the Myrtle Pond system, and you heard a lot of folks saying no thank you. We even heard a fellow who is already on the system, part of the bylaw, and he said we don't actually use the Myrtle Pond water. He said we can't afford it, and it's a farm. So I think we're going to have to take a much deeper look in how we run our rural water systems, because yeah, just a 10% increase across the board, which I know I'm going to get a lot of flack for, but it is still well below what is actually needed to keep this system long-term sustainable without burdening future generations. But that's, I think, a discussion for another day. So right now I'm comfortable with 10% and 10%. As difficult as that is.
Thank you, Director Gisborne. Is there any other discussion? Director Elliott.
Just a simple question. So talking about trying to give breaks to feed people who use less water, are the current systems have meters on them?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, it would be reasonable to review that in the future for, you know, water use efficiency conservation. And I'd just like to add that I think this is, you know, we're trying to bridge a gap between where we're at and where we need to be, or where we ideally would be. And I think that's a challenge. And, you know, it's how steep a hill do you climb? And I think we can't not climb that hill or ask the taxpayer to climb that hill. The hill has to be climbed, otherwise it leads to a cliff. But, you know, it's how quick. And I think there's option 2 on both of these motions. The previous one and this one kind of has a slope that's going to be, you know, a huff to get up that slope, but it's at least not, you know, climbing a ladder. Okay, any further discussion on this? Seeing none, I will call the question. Oh, Director, sorry, Ms. Green.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. I also wanted to mention that one of the things that we have built into the user fee bylaws in order to promote water conservation is that we're also proposing in the schedules that the incremental step between the base fees and the first overusage charge be increased to so it's a 30% jump in rates per meter. So that will also create additional revenue for or generate additional revenue for the system.
The large users.
Thank you for that.
The large, yes, for the higher users.
Okay, that's helpful. Okay, so is Director Lennox in the room there?
I'm good.
You're good? Okay. If I don't hear you, then you're voting in favor. Oh, you're there. Okay. 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 I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None carried. Great. On to item 8.6, cemetery fees and charges bylaw amendment. What is the will of the
video these meetings?
Someone like to
Share, see who's
Director Brander, sir, seconder, Director Gisborne. Okay, discussion on the cemetery fees amendment, bylaw amendment. Okay. Seeing none, I will call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, none carried. Okay.
Expensive to die.
Expensive to
That one just, okay, so we won't make any more puns. New business, none. Question period, is anyone in the room and Mr. Galinsky on the call? Is there any questions?
Yes, Chair, thank you. I have a question with regard to item 8.1, which was Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station Temporary Borrowing Bylaw. I seem to recall that Bylaw 587 was passed earlier this year, which covered off previous temporary borrowing. And so as I read it, Bylaw 592 is asking for another temporary borrowing bylaw. Am I correct in that?
I'll let Ms. Greenan give clarity on that for you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, through the chair. Yes, so whenever we borrow, whenever the board passes borrowing authority, like a loan authorization bylaw, that's what I'm trying to say. Whenever the board passes a loan authorization bylaw, then there's two other things that have to happen. And one of them is that the board also passes a temporary borrowing bylaw so that we can borrow until we actually go to debenture debt. And then the next step is for the board to do a security issuing bylaw, which allows us to go to the MFA and ask for long-term borrowing. So so you would have seen in the past, there's two loan authorization bylaws for the Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station. One was for $5.5 million. So we have the loan authorization bylaw for that, and then a temporary borrowing bylaw, and then a security issuing bylaw, which we're just going to the MFA this October. And so now this is the second $6.4 million, which the board did a loan authorization bylaw. And so now this just allows us to borrow temporarily on that authority. And then probably in the spring or maybe next fall, we will ask the board to also pass a security issuing bylaw so that we can ask the MFA to turn that now temporary borrowing into long-term debenture. So there's always those three things that happen with a loan authorization bylaw.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate the manager's detailed description of how that works. I presume through the chair that this will be the last borrowing bylaw for the Waste for Transfer Station and Resource Recovery Center.
Ms. Green?
Thank you, Chair. That is the last loan authorization bylaw that we have in place for the Resource Recovery Center and Waste Transfer Station. You know, we're still working through the project, and right now we're on budget, but there are still a number, you know, we'd have to get an update from the manager of asset management and strategic initiatives. But of course, there are still a number of contracts that haven't been issued. So at this point in time, yes, this is the last of the borrowing that has been approved for that project.
I thank the chair very much for the responses. That was very helpful.
You're welcome. Okay, and I don't believe there's anyone else in the room to ask questions. So we have an in-camera session. Would someone like to, Director Gisborne?
Yeah. I move that the committee move in camera, that the meeting be closed to the public on the grounds that the subject matter to be considered relates to matters covered by the community charter under section 91K, negotiations and related discussions respecting the proposed provision of a regional district service that are at their preliminary stages, and that in the view of the committee could reasonably be expected to harm the interests of the regional district if they were held in public, and end the consideration of whether a committee meeting should be closed under provision of this subsection or subsection 2.
True. Seconder for that? Okay, Director Elliott. Discussion, seeing none, call the question. All in favor? We are going in camera, and I think we probably have a couple-minute break and reconvene in a couple minutes.
Employment's 30 hours or more.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Here's the times 2.
Is Roger back?
Yes,
Okay, so we are back in open meeting and we are adjourned. Thank you.
See you, Andrew.
See you, Andrew.
Thank you, Andrew.
I say.